afternoon, and good evening to you, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Dr. Jifa Dordunu, and I am the co-director of the research and education arm of the PCANAD organization. For those of you who are joining us for the first time who are not aware of who we are as an organization, I invite you to go to our website, which the link will be put into the chat very soon, to learn more about who we are, what our mission and visions are. Today, I want to acknowledge that I am joining you today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, specifically the Songhe and the Wasanic nations. I am grateful to be here working and grateful to be joining you today from these beautiful lands. I also want to acknowledge that it is Black History Month, and as we are wrapping up February, it is a time for us to reflect on our collective history as people of African descent and how far we have come in the societies that we live in today. It is a time for us to celebrate our excellence, but it's also time to be reflective, to recognize of how far we have come and how much more work that we have to go. Today's topic is stem cell donation, and I am delighted to be joined with two amazing individuals who will share their stories and their passion for this topic with us. And so we'll just invite my co-hosts today, Nicole, to introduce herself, and then we'll go to our panelists.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Morrison. I'm here in Sydney, Nova Scotia. I'm also a member of the Black Nursing Association of Nova Scotia and the Director of Communications with PCANAD. So happy to see you.
Thank you, Nicole. And Sylvia.
Hello, my name is Sylvia Coniflaw, and I'm a donor recruiter with Stem Cell Club. I'm also the lead of the Black Donor Save Lives campaign, and looking forward to presenting today.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. And Ifoma.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ifoma Moen, and I'm going to be the patient on the panel today. I was born with sickle cell disease, and I'm a huge advocate for that now. And I'm here based in Edmonton, Alberta.
Thank you both, and thank you for joining us. And so now the floor is yours, Sylvia.
This webinar presentation is titled Addressing Racial Disparity in Blood and Stem Cell Donor Pools. I'll be outlining racial disparity in donor pools for red blood cells, as well as blood stem cells, which includes adult donors and cord blood graft stem cells. It will also review some of their etiologies as well as potential solutions. So let's start off with some definitions. I define race as one's identification with a group or identity ascribed on the basis of skin color and any other physical characteristics. Ethnicity, on the other hand, captures common values, cultural norms, behaviors of people that are linked by shared culture, values, and language. Ancestry, which is the interesting one here, captures the genetic origins of a population. So where race and ethnicity are social constructs or socially ascribed, ancestry is a better indicator or predictor of inheritance patterns of genetic variants or genetic alleles. Stigma. Stigma is when someone views you in a negative way because you have a distinguishing characteristics that's thought to be a disadvantage. And bias is a prejudice against a person or a group of people in a way that's considered to be unfair. Discrimination is defined as an unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people, either by race, age, sex, gender, disability, etc. And a specific example of discrimination is structural racism. And structural racism, as defined by the American Medical Association, is the totality of ways in which societies foster racial discrimination through mutually reinforcing systems. And these systems could be in the housing sector, education, employment, benefits, criminal justice, and so on. Structural racism is becoming increasingly relevant in medicine, especially in the field of hematology, as referenced by this paper that was published in Blood, which is a premier journal in hematology, where they outlined that structural racism is a mediator of disparities in acute myeloid leukemia outcomes. So now I'm going to delve into blood, specifically red blood cells, and outlining the disparities in donor pools for red blood cells. So we know that patients with hemoglobin disorders like sickle cell disease, thalassemia, they often need blood transfusions, sometimes chronically and sometimes intermittently. And as we all know here, the major blood groups, the ABO antigens, and the standard of care for patients with these hemoglobin disorders like sickle cell and thalassemia is to match these patients with blood from donors that are compatible, not just with their major antigens, but also for minor antigens, which I have some of them here. So we have the Duffy, the Diego, and in the case for premenopausal women, they also match for RHD myoantigen where possible. So what happens when a patient is exposed to donor blood that is incompatible or unmatched to some of these myoantigens? They run the risk of alloimmunization. And alloimmunization is just the body's immune system developing antibodies against the foreign RBC antigens. In short, the blood, the immune system of the patient begins to break down the quote unquote foreign blood. And these antibodies create or increase the risk for transfusion reactions, which is hemolytic reactions in the blood of the patient. And for patients with sickle cell disease receiving blood transfusions, the American Society of Hematology's guideline recommend that they're matched for additional minor antigens like the RHC antigen, the E antigen, as well as, in combination with matching for the major blood antigens. And if there's been a history of transfusion reactions, matching for other minor antigens may also be recommended. So you may be wondering, why do we need a diverse blood supply? And the answer is, blood is more likely to be a close match to the recipient if it comes from donors with similar ancestral backgrounds. So let's take, for example, when we're looking at two minor antigens, the RH and Duffy antigens. 10% of Black people with African ancestry have RH variants that are resulted in partial antigens. And 68% of Black people with African ancestry have no Duffy expressions on their red blood cells. And just based off of the epidemiology and population frequencies for populations or white populations with European ancestry, it has been shown that these two specific antigens are rare to occur in white populations with European ancestry. Again, we can look at it in terms of disease prevalence. So many diseases which are treated with blood transfusions like sickle cell, thalassemia, they disproportionately affect specific ethnic population and ancestral groups. So in the case of the prevalence of sickle cell disease in the United States, it is prevalent in 1 in every 500 Black people compared to 1 in every 100,000 white people. And if we look down in thalassemia, it is prevalent in populations with roots in the Mediterranean, Southeast Asia, China, and the Middle East. So I would like to give a visual representation here as to why we do need a diverse blood supply. So let's say we're trying to match a donor blood for this patient with this particular blood profile. So they have the major antigen O, they have all these minor antigens, and they're Duffy negative. So that the JK signal here stands for Duffy negative. So let's say we're going to screen blood from 250 white donors of Northwest European ancestry. We're going to only find 1 in 250 units of donor blood that matches exact blood profile, in comparison to 28 in 250 units when sampled from 250 Black donors of African ancestry. So this just tells you that a diverse blood supply is definitely needed, especially for specific groups that have diverse minor antigen makeup. Okay, so why don't we already have a diverse blood supply or blood donor supply? The truth is, most blood donors in Western countries are white of North and West European ancestry. So this data on the left here was data from 2017, so just a couple of years ago, that shows the breakdown of blood donors in Canada, where over 80% are of Northwest European ancestry. And then you see the other subgroups there with Black people only making up, Black people of African ancestry, I should say, only making up 1% of the entire blood donors on the registry. And with Canada, let's take a step back. With Canada being a really diverse country with 30% of its population being diverse and Black people making up 3% of the entire population, we would think that should be reflected on the blood donor registry, but it isn't so. And this is not just a Canada problem, I should say. It's a global problem. In Africa, for example, as a continent, we only have one donor registry for the entirety of that continent. In India, with a population in millions in millions, they only have a handful of blood donor registries. And in the US, African-American donors are poorly represented as well. They make up 13% of the entire population, but less than 3% of donors listed on the American Red Cross blood registry. And COVID-19, as we know it, exacerbated this a lot, as seen by that graph there. And structural racism has literally compounded everything and interfered with efforts to address barriers to donation or address racial disparity in access to blood donors. And this can be also seen in the blood donor eligibility criteria. Most blood operators, including Canadian Blood Services, temporarily defer donors who have recently visited countries with malaria risk. And that includes many African and Asian countries. And not until 2016, CBS deferred donors from multiple African countries like Nigeria, Gabon, Niger, due to risk of an HIV strain that wasn't detected through standard testing. And in 2018, a couple of years ago, CBS permitted donors from 2 other African countries, Togo and Cameroon, to donate. Previously, a history of just living in these countries, be it for a day or two, or visiting those countries, was associated with the risk of HIV. And these policies, these are examples of ways that the healthcare system has prioritized patient safety over health equity. But I argue, and my team and I argue, and this study from 2022 argues that this can be both a priority. So we can prioritize patient safety as well as health equity simultaneously. So what are some barriers to blood donation? This systemic review done in 2019 identified several barriers and facilitators of blood donation in racialized and ethnic populations. Just knowing a blood recipient, someone who's received blood from the community, acted as a facilitator to donation. Some migrants from sub-Saharan Australia needed approval from their family. And then there was this belief among Black participants that their blood was unwanted, that they were ineligible to donate, or that even when they do donate, their blood will be discarded following donation. And honestly, really, little research has been done to date on how to mitigate these barriers to donation. So with that being said about blood, I'm going to jump real quick into blood stem cells, and that would include adult donors and cord blood. So allogeneic stem cell transplantation is still and is a curative therapy for patients with a range of blood, immune, or metabolic diseases, so like leukemia, lymphoma. So in order for stem cell transplantation to work, you need a suitable donor. And the first choice usually is an HLA matched sibling donor, right? And I did put the frequency here, which I will talk about in subsequent slides. But most patients lack an HLA matched sibling donor and have to rely on alternative donor sources like a matched unrelated donor, cord blood donors, haploidentical, half-matched related donors, or this new emergent option called mismatched unrelated donors. So how these unrelated stem cell donors access. They're accessed via donor registries. In Canada, we have the Canadian Blood Services Stem Cell Registry. In the US, we have Be the Match. In the UK, we have Anthony Nolan. And across all these donor registries, over 40 million potential donors are listed worldwide. So how do people really sign up? They sign up as donors via local registry. They provide informed consent. They get vocal swab done for HLA typing to see if they're a match for a patient. And if the donor matches to a patient in need, that donor will be worked up by the transplant team. So let's say it's time for you to donate. What are two ways to donate? First way is through peripheral blood donation. And this is similar to blood donation if you've ever donated blood before. The only difference here is that they're not collecting your blood. The blood is being, the stem cells are being separated through the apheresis machine, and the blood goes back into your other arm. And then the second way to donate is through the bone marrow collection method, which is performed under general anesthesia, and they just withdraw the stem cells from your pelvic bones. And I should say that over 10 years of research here has shown that there are no adverse side effects of either of these two procedures. You might have flu-like symptoms if you donate through the peripheral blood route, or you might just feel like you've fallen on ice on the area that the stem cells were withdrawn from your hip area if you go through the bone marrow collection method. Okay, so there are disparities in access to unrelated donors, and it has been shown that patients from non-European ancestral groups have a decreased likelihood of identifying or finding an 8 out of 8 HLA marked unrelated donor. And this group did a study in 2019 with over 1,300 patients, and it was found that patients with non-European ancestry have a less than 50% likelihood of securing a life-saving 8 out of 8 unrelated donor match, as opposed to a greater than 75% chance of patients for patients of European ancestry. And then this study done in 2014 that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine shared similar results, that African patients patients of African ancestry had a 16% chance of finding an 8 out of 8 unrelated donor in comparison to a 75% chance for Northwest European patients. So what are the factors contributing to disparities in unrelated donor access? Firstly, there is just not a lot of representation on the registries. If I can draw your attention to this graph here, which shows the ethnic / racial breakdown of the donors listed on not just Canadian Blood Services Registry, but also Hemo-Quebec. And this was as of 2017, just 6 years ago. We can see that the majority of the patients, majority of the donors listed here are of Northwest European descent, and only 1.4% identified as Black, African, or Caribbean ancestry. And this seminal study here done in the 1990s, and I know it says white, but it should say Northwest Europeans, tried to gather the same number of donors, or same number of donors from Northwest European ancestry and African American ancestry, to see that if we get, let's say, 40,000 or 5,000 of these same donors, but of different ancestry, how many different combinations of HLA markers can we get? So how diverse can we get on the registry if we get the same number of donors from two different ancestral groups? And this separation line here literally shows the difference, that when you get more donors or same number of donors from African American ancestry in comparison to donors of Northwest European ancestry, there are a lot more HLA marker combinations that can be achieved through that. But there isn't obviously a lot of African donors on the registry. And another study that was done in 2014 showed that there was higher attrition. So when they actually sign up to donate, there's a higher chance that patients of African ancestry are more likely not to go through donation as compared to donors of Northwest European ancestry. Also, there's the factor of socioeconomic barriers to donation. Okay, so let's say a patient doesn't have any of the unrelated donor. There isn't an alternative donor for them. What else can they do? There are different routes, thankfully. The first one is through cord blood graft. And this is the stem cells gotten from the placenta. It's collected at the time of delivery and stored in a public cord blood bank until needed by a patient. And I guess the good thing about this is that you don't need to be fully matched. The stem cells from the placenta do not need to be fully matched to the patient. But the transplant team aimed for at least a 4 out of 8 HLA match. And it's also important in relation to the number of stem cells that can be retrieved from this, because the stem cells are gotten from placenta and what you get is what you get. So there isn't a certain dose that can be guaranteed you can get from cord blood graft. What you get from that placenta is what you get, and you have to deal with that pretty much. The second way is through haploidentical related family members. And by definition, everyone is a half match of their HLA marker to a parent or a child, because you inherit half your DNA from mom and half from your dad. For siblings, however, there is a 1 in 4 chance that you will be a perfect match to your sibling. But there is an additional 2 in 4 chance that you'll be a half match. And then there is a 1 in 4 chance that you're not a match at all to a sibling. And the third emerging option is mismatched unrelated donors. This is still going through trials. So that is one of the other emerging options. There are still disparities in access to cord blood and mismatched unrelated donors. So this study that was done in 2019 with 1,300 patients, the dark blue bar shows number of patients that received 8 out of 8 unrelated donors. The light blue shows number of patients that received 7 out of 8 unrelated donors. The red shows patients that received cord blood graft, and the yellow shows patients that didn't get anything, so didn't have any unrelated donor or cord blood graft at all. This study showed that of the patients that got the 7 out of 8, the 8 out of 8, or even cord blood graft, 80% of non-European ancestry didn't get a match at all, and majority of them were African. So there's still that disparity in access to cord blood and mismatched unrelated donors. There we go. And in the case of haploidentical donors, there is still disparities in access to that. This study in 2017 evaluated 89 adult patients who didn't have any 8 out of 8 HLA matched unrelated donor. And it was found that for patients of non-European patients, they requested a high number of family members to come in to get evaluated to see if they could become like a haploidentical donor match for them. And majority of those patients didn't even find a match at all within their family in comparison to European patients. So again, there's still that disparity, whichever way you look, the haploidentical donors, the cord blood graft, the alternative unrelated donors. Okay, so this just walks you through the time to transplant for non-European ancestry patients with AML. So they get the AML diagnosis. This study done just last year found that there was a delayed time to get referral for patients of non-European ancestry. And then when they finally got the referral, there was a longer time to actually search for a match for them. And then there was a delayed time for transplant, especially if the patient had an alternative adult donor source. Structural racism, all of this is compounded into structural racism. Again, this exacerbates efforts to address barriers and disparities to donation. This is an example of a 2019 donor health screening questionnaire that was authored by an international and multi-institutional task force. And the purpose of this was to screen donors for behavioral risk factors for infectious diseases. And if you look at question 37 and 38, it literally asks people, have you ever had sexual contact with anyone who was born in or live in Africa? Have you ever been in Africa? So questions like this exacerbate mistrust and contribute to structural racism, which I defined, which the American Medical Association defined as totality of ways in which societies foster racial discrimination through mutually reinforcing systems. And questions like this interfere with efforts to address disparity. Examples in disparities in access to donors. And quite frankly, many countries have similar questions to blood and stem cell donor screening, such as this. So what needs to be done? They need to be an acknowledgement here. There's a need to acknowledge and address past and present exclusion to overcome barriers to inclusion. So what are some potential solutions? To address specific barriers to donation, we need to do that in collaboration with advocates from the community. And that is what the Black Donor Save Lives campaign is all about. So with the Black Donor Save Lives, my team and I collaborated with Black Canadians across different provinces to create multimedia resources to help raise awareness about the need for more Black stem cell donors. We have infographics here. This one showing stem cell donation through peripheral blood collection route. We created an infographic that highlights the racial disparity that Black patients face in access to stem cell donors. We have testimonials from advocates, within the community. We have podcasts featuring more advocates. And here we have a podcast with a family of a stem cell recipient and a stem cell donor. We have TikToks, short videos, original songs, all in all to target younger demographics on TikToks and some other social media platforms. Patient stories, here we have Reve, who shares a story. We have Dorothy. We also have other patient stories, but this is just a snapshot of what we have right now. So what we did with our multimedia, we included them in a Black History Month campaign, which was first rolled out in 2021, which we titled Black Donors Save Lives. And this was shared on social media by major medical organizations, including Black Physicians of Canada. It was profiled by over 15 national media in Canada, including City News, Global News, et cetera. And these are just some of the amazing partners we have, and notably PCANAD. We didn't stop there. We went ahead and we ran some focus groups with 39 participants, all between the ages of 17 to 35, and that's the optimal age for stem cell donation. And 74% were from African ancestry, African descent, 21% Caribbean, 44% male, and they were all located across 4 provinces and country. And most of the participants in that focus group, over 85%, felt that the multimedia reduced stigma in relation to stem cell donation. And they felt the multimedia helped to address some of the barriers to donation for Black people. So after that, we did some qualitative analysis to understand the barriers and facilitators to donation for Black peoples. And some of the barriers here, number one, lack of knowledge about stem cell donation within the Black community. Some people just weren't aware. Either they just weren't aware of stem cell donation as a whole, or there was this misconception that stem cell donation was blood donation or is blood donation. And they're like, oh yeah, I donate blood, so I'm definitely on the stem cell registry. Or they just weren't aware about the racial disparity. They weren't aware about how dire this need was for more Black people to be registered on the stem cell registry. And prior exclusion from blood donation was seen as a barrier to stem cell donation. So for those people who immigrated from those countries that were barred or deferred previously from donating blood, they just see it that, oh, I've tried to donate blood before and you didn't accept it, so you definitely can't accept my stem cells. And so even if they knew about stem cell donation, they're like, oh yeah, I'm just not going to go ahead and do it. Lastly, there was just mistrust of the healthcare system. And we do have personalized quotes from participants here, but due to the constraints of time, I will not be sharing that. But mistrust of the healthcare system, I remember a quote from someone, and the person said, how do I know you're not going to take my stem cells and go make babies? As funny as it sounds at that time, it was a genuine fear of the healthcare system. And we also analyzed some facilitators to donation. They want to see more representation of Black people in multimedia. They want to see more people who look like them talking about this. They want to see involvement of the Black community in advertising and promoting this campaign. So hey, someone said, if I see it in my in my local Black gala that I attend every year. That would be nice. Like if I see you guys talking about this there. So the places they frequent, they want to see more involvement in advertising, those people promoting this campaign. This quote here was from an ACB community member who participated in an ACB organ health initiative. I know I didn't talk about organs and tissues, but I just thought to share this quote, which I thought was really interesting. This person said, we don't understand and we don't believe that the system is for our best interest. So there is that degree of suspicion. And that suspicion could result in us not revealing information that could be valuable. So they know it could be valuable. And also at times giving misinformation because we're not understanding what's happening. I can let that sit with you for a bit, but this was pretty, I guess, mind-boggling to me. Moving on, what are some starting points for solutions? Number one, advocate for development and implementation of policies, especially donation policy, that prioritize equity alongside patient safety. We don't have to choose which one has to come on top. We can prioritize both and address systemic racism in healthcare. Donation messaging needs to come from healthcare providers and members of the community. They want to feel safe. They want to feel as though the people telling them this information looks like them and has their best interests at heart. Lastly, this work needs to proceed alongside broader efforts to address structural racism in healthcare. So the Black Donors Save Lives campaign is not the only work that needs to be done. I just wanted to put that out there. It needs to work alongside broader efforts to address structural racism in healthcare. I would like to acknowledge the experts in transfusion medicine, my PI, Dr. Warren Finger, Dr. Jenny Ha for her expertise in donation studies, some of the patient advocates we had, and our medical student collaborators. And lastly, thank you so much, PCANAD, for the opportunity to present today, and I look forward to the discussion that follows. Thank you.
So next, we're going to turn our attention to Euphoma. And Euphoma, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and tell us your story.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen right away and we'll get into a presentation. Perfect. All right. I hope everyone can see my screen. Yeah, so my name's Euphoma, and like I kind of mentioned before, I was born with sickle cell disease. I had a stem cell transplant, and yeah, today I'm just kind of gonna share my story with you and, you know, where my journey has really led me. And before I get right into that, just 1 minute. There we go. So before I get right into that, I just wanted to say thank you to PCANAD and the Stem Cell Club. I really, really, really appreciate the work that you're doing. It honestly, stem cells changed my life. Yeah, stem cells really did change my life. So the work that you guys do is so, so important. And actually when Sylvia was talking about her thank yous to Dr. Warren and Dr. Jenny Ha, I work with Jenny Ha and she's just so amazing. She's really, really opened my eyes to just so many new things in stem cell, and it's really just brought about a new passion for stem cell advocacy. So I really hope that you guys are touched by the work that PCANAD does and the Stem Cell Club, and also by my story. And also just in general, I love Black History Month so, so much. And so I'm just so grateful to be Black, to be honest, and to really take part. I've been to so many events online and in person this month, and it's just so enriching. I feel like not only is it educational, informative, I'm learning more about my culture, I'm learning more about Black culture, but I'm just seeing the work of so many different organizations in, all facets of life. So yeah, I just wanted to take time to say thank you. I hope everyone has enjoyed Black History Month, and I hope that I'm able to contribute to your experience. So yeah. So today I'm just going to tell you about my story, about the organization that was birthed out of my story, and then of course, some ways that you can kind of help. So yeah, like I said, my name is Euphoma, and most people call me Foma, so you can just, call me Foma. It's easier for some. And yeah, I was diagnosed with sickle cell disease at age 2, and I battled it for 18 years. Yeah, so when I was 18, That's when I got the call that I can do, or when I was turning 18, that's when I could get a stem cell transplant. But the 18 years of sickle cell disease, it was rough. Like it was rough. I'm not going to lie. Sickle cell disease is it's not an easy disease to live with. It's also not an easy disease to care for. I'm always so grateful to everybody that has supported me in my journey. I think sickle cell disease has really taught me the power of relationships and, the power of community, why it's so important to have a community around you. And, especially because, when I had sickle cell disease, I lived life on red alert. You just never knew when you were going to get sick. And like, if you did, like you had a very small window to like get it together to, potentially mitigate a crisis. But most times that didn't happen. Like when the pain crisis comes, the pain crisis is here to stay. And it was a lot. And yeah, I felt like, I will say, I feel like I had a really great childhood and, like before I entered adulthood, but I did definitely miss out on certain parts of childhood. And I have this quote on the screen that just says, be careful of having too much fun because you might get a crisis. And that's from my mom. She said that all the time, all the time, all the time. Like it was you can't play too hard. You can't play too much sports. You can't do too much of anything because you'll probably trigger a crisis and you'll have to go to the hospital. And then, you're missing out on a week of fun or a week of, like, I feel like childhood, there's so many things that go on in your childhood. And so like taking a break for 1 week felt like the end of the world every single time. So yeah, like sickle cell disease it's not a game. And so I can kind of just talk about my life pre-transplant and then what it was like post-transplant. And so, my earliest memories of sickle cell disease, I feel like from childhood is like I loved swimming when I was a kid. And I felt like I always wanted to swim outside, indoors. I remember taking swimming lessons and literally that didn't last very long because I would start feeling the bony joint pain in my knees, elbows, my chest, my lower back. And like typically like maybe like if I went swimming 5 times in the year, like 3 times would result in the hospital. So yeah, like I just know that sickle cell disease really kind of robbed me of my love for swimming. And yeah, and I'd say like some of my treatment regimens at the time, because the sickle cell crises were just so extreme. Um, and essentially I would start with like Tylenol and Advil, but obviously like that did nothing. And then I moved on to like oral codeine, but honestly codeine kind of stopped working for me at around like age like 8 or something like that. Yeah, right before I had moved actually to Edmonton. I used to live in Toronto. And so yeah, once codeine kind of stopped working, then I eventually started taking like oral morphine and of course like the hospital treatments. I also liked topical analgesics. Like I still really enjoy those like Voltaren, Rub A535 and stuff like that. I felt like that always, I don't know, sometimes I'm like, I feel like there were things that we would just do for placebo just to know, okay, at least I mitigated this option. Like also like the magic bags or like bean bags, warm compresses. That was like one of my go-tos. I feel like me and my magic bag went everywhere together. We still kind of do. And sometimes like, if you ask me, did that really work? Sort of. Sometimes I feel like it was placebo, but it gave me that comfort that I needed. And then, when I would go for hospital treatments, when the crisis was just so unbearable and I couldn't manage it at home, then my treatments looked like morphine infusions, saline, and oxygen. And the morphine infusions would get me messed up for a really long time. And, you're just taking such really, really strong medication and at such a young age, to be honest. And so I definitely, when we talk about like, opioids, opioid crisis and stuff like that, like I really do, my heart goes out to that is an initiative that is really, really dear to my heart because I really see how easy it is, to fall into that and, not, especially when there's not proper education, proper management of some of these narcotic drugs that patients need. Like I needed that. Like if I didn't get the morphine infusion, it was like, it really felt like my life was on a time, like a little timer. And so I just, that's kind of an aside, but my heart really does go out to those who do work in the trying to fight the opioid epidemic, because it is so easy, so easy to fall into that. And so it kind of, that's just an aside of one of the reasons why it's so important to become a donor, because not only are you giving people a new shot at life, you know, from their disease, but like also some of the things that come with having this disease, right? And so another form of my treatments would be blood transfusions. And I typically would, you know, get those about once a year. My hemoglobin was always very, very low. But thankfully I didn't have to have transfusions super regularly, but they made a huge difference, like huge difference, almost instantly. And so again, more reasons why you should also donate blood, and not just stem cells as well. And so one of the other treatments I started taking was hydroxyurea in my teens. And hydroxyurea actually really did work for me. While I used to have hospital admissions about 5 times a year when I started, and those were hospital admissions for pain crises that we couldn't manage at home. So probably double, triple that for the ones that I could manage at home. But then once I started taking hydroxyurea, it definitely cut down, you know, the amount of times I was going into hospital. So it probably cut that down into half. So it's getting half as many pain crises. But I think although I was like, the treatment was working for me, when my crises would come, I feel like the pain matured with me as I aged. Like they would just get more and more intense. And so while I wasn't having them frequently, I was in like the intensity when they did came was just a lot for me. And so, yeah, and, you know, like I said, even though all these treatments, you know, in some way or another, they were working for me, my condition was maturing. And so that's when I actually had the opportunity to undergo a reduced intensity bone marrow transplant. And at the time, this was a relatively new procedure because I had this treatment in 2016. So yeah, I'm about, is that 6 years at the end in September this year, post-transplant. So that's like a really big deal. And yeah, and you know, the process was like relatively simple, you know, from the patient perspective, you know, chemo, radiation, and then you get your stem cells. And my sister was actually my donor. So I was one of the 30%, about 20 to 35% of people who need stem cell transplants who actually have a sibling match. She was 100% match. And it was so amazing at the time. I think she was like 12 years old. Which was also some might say that was risky. And just to Sylvia, when she was answering some of the questions about if those with sickle cell or sickle cell trait can donate. My sister actually has sickle cell traits, and so she was my donor. So yeah, that just, you know, to tie the knowledge together. But yeah, I had my stem cell transplant. There were lots of side effects and some challenges in terms of like constipation, nausea, vomiting, weight change, fatigue, hair loss, skin discoloration, and so much more. And, you know, you might hear this and be like, oh my God, that's terrifying. Like, I wouldn't want to put someone through this, but like, literally, it is no comparison. It can never be a comparison to one sickle cell crisis. Like, honestly, like my transplant experience, I'm so privileged to say that it was a walk in the park compared to, you know, my pain episodes and just living with sickle cell disease. And, you know, I'm so grateful to have had this treatment, to be privileged to have had such a treatment, because like I said, I was one of the 25%, 20 to 35% of people who have a sibling match. But the truth is there's another 70% of people who do not have sibling matches for treatment. And so it's really, you know, on the responsibility of civilians like yourself to join the stem cell registry, to, you know, give people the privilege to actually undergo this treatment. Because every time I'm, you know, talking to people about this treatment, I always make it so clear that it is a privilege. it's, it's not the most accessible. And I think that by, joining the stem cell registry, you are making it more accessible for, more individuals. So, second, there we go. And so now I've had a bone marrow transplant, and like, this is kind of my life now. I'm able to really like live, and like plainly as that, I feel like now I live life to the fullest, like to the maximum capacity, because I honestly could not before. In the middle of the page, you see, I went to the University of Alberta, and I actually graduated last year. So yay. I thought it would never happen. And I put that on there because it's just to show you, like, you don't realize how, for someone who is like, doesn't have a chronic illness, you don't realize how hard life is for those with chronic illnesses. Because to tell you the truth, I do not think I would have been able to make it through university hadn't I had a bone marrow transplant. University is so intense and so stressful. And literally high school, there were times where I was just so stressed out with like school that I would get a crisis. And I can't imagine with the intensity of classes. I did a double major in biology and psychology. And so I was doing a lot of work, and, and like the intensity of classes, the intensity of labs or homework, or then, if you want to pursue something after your undergrad, you need to do extracurricular activities, or even if you want to get a job, like, to be able to perform and succeed in university the way that the system has been set up, it's not fit for people who, have chronic illnesses. And so I'm just so grateful to have finally seen the end of my degree, and even just to have made it year after year. And what some people might not know is I was so eager to start university that I actually so the stem cell transplant process, essentially it's 3 months. About 100 days where you undergo the treatment, you stay in isolation so that your body can accept your donor cells. And what many people don't know is I decided to just rush right into university. So immediately after my 3 months, I started school. Big mistake, do not recommend. But I just felt like I was watching my life go by during treatment. And so I was just so excited. And, after, you receive a stem cell transplant, your immune system is really, really low. So that was a really hard process. That first year after my treatment, my immune system was low, and, people are like, sick and don't stay home and things like that. I'm sure we all understand that now with the pandemic. But back then, like, no, we were coming to school sick and not wearing masks. And so I was really at risk, and I kind of put myself in like dangerous situations by doing that. And even just stress on the body. But again, like, I know that if I had that sickle cell, that stem cell transplant, I wouldn't have been able to cross that graduation stage. And you can also see here that like I went bungee jumping for one of my birthdays recently. And like just things like that would have been an absolute no-go. On the left over here, you can see me in the desert. This was in Dubai. I actually went on a trip to Dubai a few years ago now, and I put that on there just because when you have sickle cell disease, flying like in an airplane is actually a problem. You actually cannot fly. I believe it's more than like 5 hours, at least for my sickle cell disease and my treatment plan. I actually wasn't allowed to fly without oxygen for any flight over 5 hours. And if I didn't bring my oxygen tank with me and like, was strapped in throughout those flights, I would probably get a crisis on the plane before landing, right after landing, or sometime within my stay on the trip. And I would like ruin my own trip. And so that was a real life scenario that actually happened where unfortunately I had a crisis on a vacation, which really, really sucked. And I had to go to the hospital, and it was rough. Have travel insurance, y'all. But yeah, and so I put it on there that like, I went to Dubai, and I flew that long flight. I think it was like 8 hours or something in transit, and and then also like the intensity of like fun that I could actually have. Like I can live life to the fullest. I can do whatever I want. Just have like such an amazing life, I feel like. I went jet skiing. I couldn't do that before. Water sports, water anything, absolutely not. But I can do that now. And then also like I started Not Just You. And that's my organization to, just advocate for the sickle cell community. We want to support as many people as possible. And so I've been able to, even the intensity of running a nonprofit, that's a lot to do. And for a long time, I was doing that alongside school. I was doing that alongside having a job. And so like, I can take on so much and like live life at like, I can live life at like a huge capacity. I feel like my capacity to do things, to serve people, to be a part of like society has increased simply because I had this transplant, and I think a memory that I want to share with you guys is when I actually had my stem cell transplant. I had it in Calgary, Alberta, at the Alberta Children's Hospital at the time. And we were living in an apartment down in downtown Calgary, not too far from the hospital. And like one of the apartments is just by like a river in Calgary. And so they would always encourage me, like, on when it's like there's like nobody outside, a very slow time, try to go take walks and stuff like that. And so I remember my mom and I went for a walk this one day, and I just remember like telling her that, for the first time, like, I feel like I can like breathe. And I just remember the feeling so vividly that like it felt like in that moment when we were walking down the river, I felt like my whole life I didn't realize just how sick I was until like I don't know, it was so weird. It felt like the oxygen was just going through my body so well. I just felt so healthy. And at that time, like I think I had my stem cells had grafted at that point. But like I was very early in the process. And so just to feel that difference was it was so profound. And I will forever hold on to that memory of just like, just it came to my mind that like, wow, like it was as if I had like this weight on me my whole life that I just didn't know. And having like, I felt normal, like the rest. I was really asking my mom, like, is this what you feel like, And like another memory that even till this very day that I just look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, wow. One of the symptoms of sickle cell disease, you often see that we have yellow eyes, like the whites of our eyes are yellow. And so, sometimes depending on like, the status of like your health at the time, they can be more yellow than others. But no matter what, no matter how much water I drank, how healthy I was at that time, how high my hemoglobin was, there was always that yellowish tinge. And I always just knew myself that way. And that was kind of like a marker. My mom would just stare at my eyes and be like, I feel like you should hydrate. Have you been taking your medication? Because if they were too yellow, she knew I was falling sick. And I just remember like after maybe 2 weeks having received my stem cells, I remember looking in the mirror and like the whites of my eyes were like white. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, who is that? And I just like kept looking at myself. My mom kept looking at me because like this was like a new person to me. And now when I do my makeup in the mornings or, like when I'm brushing my teeth, like I really like, it's a constant reminder that like, I'm like renewed. And I feel like this sounds like super deep, but like, this is really what it was like. I just look and I'm like, wow, like, oh my gosh, is this me, And so, these are just little things that have made a huge difference in my world and my confidence, the way I interact with people. And so, yeah, I hope that this, inspires you to join the registry. And so, as I said before, it led me to starting Not Just You, which is a sickle cell support organization. And, like I said, this transplant was, it was really life-changing. And I recognized that it was just, not as accessible for everybody dealing with sickle cell disease. And also like, one of the things that not everyone talks about with sickle cell disease is just the stigmatization, the shame that can be associated with this disease. And, my journey with like my sickle cell disease and with my family is, we were pretty isolated and alone with my walk with sickle cell disease. Even some of my family members, you know, especially within like African, Caribbean, Black communities, sickle cell disease can sometimes in certain communities be deemed as, you know, it has mystical origins. Sometimes they associate it with witchcraft, and you know they have all these different names. It's a death wish. There's no curing them. They're just gonna die, etc., etc. And so, unfortunately, this was like a reality for me. I had family members that really like they just packed it up. They abandoned my mom and our side of the family because I was born with sickle cell disease, a disease that, as I'm sure we know now, is, you know, it's hereditary. And there's science to prove all of this, but because there's just a little bit of ignorance in some of the communities, they they just believe that. And so there are parts of my family that, like, unfortunately, we just don't have a relationship because this is how they treated me from birth. As soon as the diagnosis came out, so at age 2. And, you know, I feel like, you know, this is something that is like, you know, comes from like, you know, back home, wherever you might be from. So for me, I'm Nigerian. And so I feel like, you know, this negative connotation with sickle cell follows our families and, you know, the community from Africa all the way here in the West. And I believe that it has created this, unfortunately, it's created, what's the word that I want to use? This kind of stigma, I'll say that, in the community. And people do not talk about their condition. They do not talk about their disease. They battle it out in silence. And so it was my feelings of loneliness and isolation throughout sickle cell disease that pushed me to Not Just You. And so I founded the organization in 2018. And, you know, I just wanted to, you know, really remind individuals who are affected by this disease that it is not just you going through it, and that there's always going to be someone there for you. Because I think when I was growing up, I really needed to hear that. I think my mom needed to hear that. Whilst community is so important, and like I said, I started this off by just being grateful for community. You know, I had my tight knit community, but the greater sickle cell community was just unfortunately, like, it just wasn't there, especially within my like ethnic community. And so I really want that to change. And that's why, you know, I founded Not Just You. And there were also a bunch of hiccups with my transplant, between myself and like the healthcare system, the insurances, you know, and, you know, at the end of the day, these systems are less than perfect, right? And so I didn't want to settle in the gray area. And that's why I started Not Just You. And so, you know, our mission and our mission is really to shed celebratory light on sickle cell and, you know, provide a sense of hope for these individuals. Because I think when your community stigmatizes you, the healthcare system deems you as narcotic seeking, you know, the institution is inherently racist at times. I think it can really be easy to lose hope. I know there were times where I would lose hope. I wouldn't want to advocate for myself. And I'm grateful to have had, you know, my mom, who is also a healthcare professional, to really teach me how to do that. But I know that it's not the same for most individuals. And so that's what we really want to be able to do, is provide them with hope, provide them with resources. And so our vision is that we want to be an easily accessible, broad support network that educates, motivates, and celebrates these individuals and families affected by this disease. And, you know, whilst we do this on a local scale here in Edmonton, we've also actually had the privilege to go to Vancouver and Toronto and do donations down there at the different hospitals that have all actually touched my life. You know, we also want to have an impact internationally. And so, you know, I have dreams of eventually going back to Nigeria and, you know, addressing some of the stigma, you know, educating and, you know, also collaborating with some of the amazing communities and organizations down there doing such good work. And so I guess I'll wrap this up with, you know, just letting you know ways that you can help. Of course, number one, get screened for sickle cell trait. I could shout this to the moon tops. I'm so passionate about this. I think it's so important. If you don't know, even if you have kids and, you know, you're not planning on having more kids or anything, like, I still think it's really important to know, get your kids screened for sickle cell trait, because at the end of the day, prevention is better than cure. You know, I'm going to tell you the next thing is to donate organs, that's stem cells and blood. You know, but at the end of the day, like if you get screened for sickle cell trait, right, and you're not passing on sickle cell to offspring, then, you know, then there's still going to be a need for stem cells, but, you know, you've at least decreased the population that will need it, right? And so, yeah, donate stem cells. I hope my story has convinced you at least a little bit as to why it's so important to join the stem cell registry. And of course, donate blood, because just as much as stem cells, blood saves lives too. It's really important from Black people. Just, you know, there's so many less side effects that happen, especially even with down to blood, right? And of course, you know, you can donate money to organizations like myself, the Stem Cell Club. Yeah, many organizations doing good work, and of course, spread sickle cell awareness. I always tell people that I want like sickle cell disease and sickle cell trait. These should be first date topics. These should be things that you talk about with your friends. It shouldn't be taboo or uncomfortable. I think it's really important to destigmatize these conversations. And yeah, and, you know, like I said, why should you even consider donating? It's really a way of supporting the sickle cell community and as well as other various illnesses. I'm sure many of you had heard about the campaign for Ezra, and I believe he had a very rare form of cancer. He was a Black little boy. I think he was probably like 2 years old, who needed a stem cell transplant, and him and his family were doing a campaign across the country looking for a donor. And unfortunately, they were not able to find a donor in time. And, you know, Ezra unfortunately passed away. And so, you know, whilst he doesn't have sickle cell disease, that story really, really, really touched me. I'm actually so privileged to be meeting his family next week as well. And so, yeah, like, I just think, you know, a story like that should really touch you to even just consider it, you know, learn more about it. And, you know, of course, you know, blood banks and transplant centers, they're literally always in need. There can never be enough. So it's just so important to, you know, at least think about donating, finding out if you're eligible, etc. And, you know, specifically to Black people watching, you know, why should you consider donating? Well, it directly affects the Black community. It affects people who look just like you. And, you know, the closer in match, as we learned from Sylvia's presentation, the closer, you know, in match with the stem cells and blood, the better it is for the recipient. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions, you know, please feel free to ask. You can keep in touch with Not Just You on our website, our Instagram, or if you want to, like, you know, talk to me personally on the side, these are like my socials and stuff like that.